Let me welcome you to another evening of Food Literacy for All. We're very happy to see you all. Thanks for joining us. I have just a couple of brief announcements before we turn to our introduction for this evening. First of all, just to recognize the organizations within the university and also at large that have helped support this class and all of the wonderful guest speakers that we're experiencing. And then secondly, one brief community announcement for, in this film series on campus about food, Asparagus, Stalking the American Life, coming up tomorrow in the Dana Building. So sponsored by one of the student organizations. It's not quite asparagus season, but the weather today reminds us that it's not too far off. So, and now I'd like to invite Brother Malik to introduce tonight's speaker.
Good evening. How's everyone doing? We have to do this again. I had to go through this last week. Good evening. How's everyone doing? So the presentation tonight is going to be unlike any of the others we've had so far. And I'll start by saying that our speaker is not a farmer. She may not be a vehement anti-capitalist like some of the other folks that we've heard, but she's doing incredibly important work. And so we couldn't possibly have discussions and a course on food and food sovereignty and food justice without talking about first food. And so our speaker today is a nationally known expert on first food, or what some people like to call breastfeeding. Kimberly Seals Allers is an award-winning journalist, author, and a nationally recognized media commentator, consultant, and advocate for breastfeeding and infant health. A former senior editor at Essence and a writer for Fortune magazine, Kimberly is widely considered a leading voice in the counterculture social movement in infant feeding and maternal health. Last month, she was named as one of 21 leaders for the 21st century by Women's E-News. Kimberly's fifth book, The Big Letdown, How Medicine, Big Business, and Feminism, and I really want to hear that part, Undermine Breastfeeding, an Amazon bestseller, was published by St. Martin's Press in January of last year. She recently served as project director for the First Food Friendly Community Initiative, a pilot project in Detroit and Philadelphia that was funded by the W.K. Kellogg Foundation to create a national accreditation process for breastfeeding-friendly communities. She's a frequent contributor to the New York Times and the Washington Post, is also a popular public speaker on community-based strategies to reduce the racial disparities in breastfeeding and infant mortality rates. She has testified at congressional hearings on infant health. In 2011, she was named as an Institute for Agriculture Trade Policy Food and Community Fellow focused on reframing breastfeeding disparities as food systems issues. And that's actually where I met Kimberly, because we were in the same cohort in that fellowship. Kimberly has appeared on Good Morning America, CNN, Anderson Cooper, the Tom Joyner Morning Show. How many people know who Tom Joyner is? Oh, a few folks, okay.
Come on now.
Fox News. And has been featured in various international and national media outlets, including The Guardian in the UK, U.S. News and World Report, Essence, Black Enterprise, Pregnancy, and in various online media publications. Kimberly is a graduate of New York University and Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism. She's a divorced mother of two. One of her children, her oldest children, will be starting college soon, and she's experiencing some anxiety about that, so be nice to her while she's here. She lives in Queens, New York with her children. Please give a warm round of applause to Kimberly Seals Allers.
Thank you so much, Baba Malik. I really appreciate that introduction. I begged you not to read the whole thing. I'm so grateful because Baba Malik was one of my early teachers. When we were in the Food Fellowship program, when we started the fellowship, They sent me out to the yard to pick herbs. It was a joke because I was a person from New York City, and I was just like, this looks like grass. And but by the time the fellowship was over, I could do the task, and he was one of my great teachers around food, so I'm very grateful for the experience. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm so honored to be a part of this important series around food literacy. And if we're talking about food literacy and we're talking about food justice, then we have to start with the most vulnerable among us, right? Because if we can't get justice for babies, we can't get justice for anyone. So why is this so important? Well, let's dig in. This is me. Well, Plato said the beginning is the most important part of any work, right? And that's because at the beginning, what happens? So much happens. At the beginning, so many things are formed. At the beginning, so many patterns are set, right? And we're learning more and more that humans have a very unique beginning. We're the only mammals that are born like not fully developed. Our brains still take like another year to develop. You've probably seen some animals, they're born, they come out walking. That takes us another year or so. And so what does it mean when we come out underdeveloped, and how important it is for our early nutrition to actually guide that development, right? Now we're also learning, there's been some amazing work coming out of the Monell Center for Sciences around how even what you are fed in utero impacts your taste preferences, right? So if my mom ate a lot of sugar, I was going to be born with a taste for sugar, right? And so the beginning really matters because it can kind of create your taste trajectory and actually form that pattern for healthy eating going forward. So we know this is really, really important. So first foods definitely matter, right? So if first foods matter, then why don't we give them more attention? What's going on in our country? Well, what do we know? When it comes to breastfeeding, 79% of newborns are started to breastfeed. That means any mother who has put a child on her breast at any point in the hospital is included in this number, right? So that's a great increase. But we also can see that if you look at 6 months duration or even at 12 months, which is really considered the gold standard for infant nutrition, that number drops precipitously, right? And so we have a lot of people starting, not many people able to continue to actually achieve that goal for optimal nutrition. Now, among that, we have even starker numbers for African American women. 83% of newborns are started to breastfeed, 55% were breastfeeding at 6 months, 27% at 12 months. So for over 40 years, there's been this persistent racial disparity in breastfeeding rates. Now, any disparity that has existed for over 40 years, I think we can all agree shouldn't exist, right? That's just far too long for something to not have been done to significantly narrow a gap. So what's happening? So there's a group of infants who disproportionately are not receiving their optimal nutrition. And we know that has outcomes, that has repercussions in terms of their health outcomes, it has repercussions in terms of Black infant mortality rate, right? And has repercussions around even the birth outcomes, right? In the African American community, far too many women have their babies who are born too small, too sick, or too soon. And those babies actually need breast milk to live. So when those infants don't have breast milk and they have to have an inferior nutritional product, their lives are compromised. And so we see this high infant mortality rate connected to this disparity in breastfeeding rates. So why does this disparity exist? This is one of your poll questions. So this is my first time using this method, but what do you think are some of the possible reasons for the racial disparities in breastfeeding? What are some of the possible reasons? A, lack of education. B, historical trauma. C, systemic racism and bias. D, lack of multi-generational support and role models. So most of you said C, systemic racism. C, you've been trained well. And then D, lack of multi-generational support. Now, it is true that all of these answers are correct, but actually C causes A. Because what we're finding is that because there is a perception that Black women don't breastfeed, that many physicians don't bother to educate them. And so the fact that they don't receive the education is often related to a bias or a misconception or a stereotype about what Black women do. So that's really important. So we want you to hold on to that. So one of the things we have to do in order about thinking around a new landscape is we have to acknowledge the historical trauma, right? Black women during slavery, they were forced to stop breastfeeding their own babies and forced to breastfeed the children of their white slave owners. Now, if you know anything about breastfeeding, you know that breastfeeding and breast milk is more than about nutrition. It's actually bonding, right? If I think about nursing my son, I could still give myself goosebumps because of that feeling of breastfeeding, right? It's a very strong emotional connection, and none of us can imagine what it would be like to be forced to give that emotional bond to the child of your oppressor. None of us. Meanwhile, we know from historical accounts that Black women, their own children suffered. While they were being forced to breastfeed the children of their white slave owners, their own children suffered and or died. So we understand that there is a disrupted breastfeeding experience. And so often in my work, when I speak to particularly older women, you hear breastfeeding as something they have a negative connotation to, something that we did for other people, something that we were forced to do, right? Something we didn't do for ourselves, or something that reminds us of a time that we'd rather soon forget. And so we can't really have this conversation without understanding how all these other factors impact what's happening with the infants today. We also know that the medical field in general has a complicated relationship with communities of color, right? We can go back to the Tuskegee experiment, Henrietta Lacks in New York. They are about to tear down a statue of a obstetrician who got most of his accolades experimented on Black women. And so this disjointed relationship, right, is really, really important for us to consider, particularly since in this space, we've been using physicians and doctors and science as the basis of evidence, trying to tell women to do something based on a model that they may not even trust. And so if we don't acknowledge the historical trauma, if we don't acknowledge where racism has impacted where we are today, then we're not going to be able to create something new that actually honors this and uses it as a way forward. So clearly, we have a daunting task, right? And that we need all hands on deck. So one of the first places we think of is physicians. Now, we just talked about how this is a complicated relationship with physicians. But to add to that, physicians are not even taught about lactation in medical school. It's not covered. I probably interviewed close to 100 pediatricians for my book, and maybe like most of them had a half a day at the most, right? So you have physicians who aren't trained in lactation management, and then you have women who are going to doctors who they think know about something that they actually don't know anything about. The worst part about this, and I want to just read you this part briefly from my book, is that in the space of doctors not being trained in lactation management, what has happened? What has happened, right? Where medical schools have failed to educate, infant formula companies have been more than happy to fill the gap. In the absence of independent medical training, doctors and mothers alike have relied on the commercial industry, the one supplying and profiting from the substitute product, to provide so-called unbiased education and guidance, right? So doctors are getting trained at the institutes that the infant formula company set up. How's that going to work, right? So every year, the Abbott Nutrition Institute hosts conferences to educate thousands of physicians and nurses on infant nutrition. Imagine you going to see a licensed dietitian who had been trained at the McDonald's Nutrition Institute, right? That wouldn't be okay. That wouldn't be okay. We wouldn't say that you can be trained by the people benefiting from the commercial product, and that would be sufficient. But somehow when it comes to women's bodies and the thing that women uniquely do, this is somehow acceptable. So we know we're dealing with something bigger than what it looks like, right? So, next question for you. Infant formula is FDA approved, true or false? It's all an infant's going to eat for the first 12 months of their life, right? A, true, B, false. Now, if I eat too much sugar today, tomorrow I'm going to balance it out. I'm going to double up on Zumba this week, right? I have a way to make it work. But an infant doesn't really have that option. They are pretty much suspect and subject to whatever they are given. Very good. B is the correct answer. Formula is not FDA approved. Why is that? Because the government has determined that it is a food, not a drug, right? And when it's food, all you have to do is meet the GRAS, generally regarded as safe model, right? And so basically, formula is tested on its composition. So the government will say it has to have protein, it has to have a sugar, it has to have this, but no one is regulating it. So the industry is mostly self-regulated because the government allows it to be so, right? And so the fact that the most vulnerable among us have the least protection around their food is something that we all have to think about. You would think that this area would actually have more protections, more stringent guidelines. But basically, infant formula companies are allowed to test something, and until someone complains because a baby got sick, then they will change it, which basically turns all infants into an unsuspecting, focus group, petri dish of experimentation, unbeknownst to them. So how do we understand that these influences that we're talking about are really huge, right? And so when we're thinking about the complex nature of the government's role, right, it is no accident that infant formula is based on cow's milk, which has no nutritional or dietary reason. It was just that we had a huge excess of milk in this country, and they were looking for products to use for the milk. That's how cow's milk got used. Now, if you can't use cow's milk, you will be instructed to use soy milk, the number 2 commodity that the government subsidizes in this country. I'm a bit more radical than you thought, Pablo. So all of these things have much more to do with money than nutritional benefit, right? Every time a woman fails to breastfeed, someone makes money. And it's not just the formula, it's the whole bumper crop of ancillary products, from bottles to teats, all the things that you need when breastfeeding fails. So there is a commercial interest, a vested interest in the failure of breastfeeding. On top of that, the pharmaceutical companies are happy to create the drugs to fix the problems that your poor infant nutrition created. So they have a vested interest in our babies being sick because they want to sell them drugs down the line. All works out well for the industry, not so great for infants, right? So clearly we need a new framework. We know the problem is huge. We know we're taking on a Herculean feat, but how do we change the way we think about these issues? So I'm going to introduce a new framework that I really want you to consider. And I know I'm talking to a lot of academic folks and maybe some public health students, but I want you to take this on. Whatever the question, the answer is in the community. Whatever the question, the answer is in the community, right? Why is this so powerful? Why is this so necessary? Because we know in other areas of public health that place matters, right? Where you live can literally influence your likelihood to have asthma, diabetes, all other types of things, right? So we know that where you live matters. But we haven't considered this framework in looking at, can a woman successfully breastfeed? Which means, does that infant have a chance at getting its optimal nutrition, right? And how do we now start thinking about how we look at place as a social determinant of how successful a woman can be at breastfeeding? And it's not just about her choice. It's not just about her choice. So in the broader food world, what have we learned, right? We used to go around and tell people, eat well and exercise, eat well and exercise. That sounded good. And then we realized there were literally millions of people who couldn't easily access healthy fruits and vegetables or didn't have a safe place to work out, or not even a sidewalk, right? So it was a great message, but disconnected from the reality of many people's lives, right? So how do we actually reframe this system, but with a connection to people's lives, what their lived experiences in their local community, right? That's what we want to do. We don't want to just have simplistic messaging telling women to breastfeed when they can't. It's virtually impossible. That's not what we're going for here. So I'm a word person, so please humor me. Community and communicate, they both come from the same Latin root word that means shared, right? One meaning a shared space, another meaning a shared language. So to create something that's based on community, we have to have a shared language. But instead, what do we find? Doctors have their own language, nurses have their own language, public health folks have their own language, academia has their own language, and nobody is speaking a shared language. Right? And so that leads us to ask a very important question. Do we have a breastfeeding problem or do we have a communication problem? So I believe most things can be solved with communication, and that perhaps we've been talking about this issue singularly and this broader food issue in the wrong way. So what could that look like? So let's ask the question, what if communities are deserts of support? Now I know my sister LaDonna was here, and she said, oh, she hasn't been there yet? Oh, well, she's going to talk about the word deserts. And we understand that a desert is a thriving ecosystem, right? Things live in the desert, things grow in the desert. But not everything can grow in the desert, right? Not everything is built to grow in the desert. What we want from our communities is that everything grows there. Everything grows there. And they don't need special circumstance or special attributes to thrive in their community. So with this framework, we went to really think about the community in a different way, right? So many times we think of the community as a place we go to fix and change. We go to the office, come up with these great ideas, and then we're going to go to the community, we're going to fix it, we're going to save the community. We don't view the community actually as a source of knowledge, a place for us to learn from. And we have to get away from this power dynamic of somebody saving the community, right? Versus the community actually being a source for a place where we can learn. And we're going to tell you about the things I learned in the community. So we view the community as a partner, right? Not as a place we go to fix and change, but actually as a partner that we value in the breastfeeding ecosystem that's equally as important, right? A mother is going to need support from a physician, she's going to need support from her peers, she's going to need support from a lactation consultant, she needs support from our community. It's all the same, right? Because we know that in this country, it is great that you may have had a great experience at a hospital, but a hospital visit is only 2 or 3 days stay for most women. And so if a woman goes to a hospital, very important, even if she has a good experience there, if she leaves the hospital and goes into a community that does not have any support or resources, she is in a setup for failure. I think she deserves better than that, right? So we're not trying to set women up for failure by having support one place and then it completely drops off. Remember those numbers we saw about how people start and then they don't continue by the time they're home for a while, right? Okay. Also, in this project, we disrupt the notion that experiential knowledge is not valuable, right? Scientific models are a construct. Someone said that this evidence-based is better than this. Someone created that. It doesn't make it so. It just makes it said, right? And so we actually disrupt this knowledge, that this model, that experiential knowledge is not valuable. We actually value that over any evidence-based thing you could read. And I'm always asking evidence based on whom? Very important question to ask, right? So we actually take the lived experience of the community members and we value that and we use that as our model for change, as our data source for change, as it were. So I often say the experience of being interpreted is different from the experience of being understood. And this is really, really important. It's something I always say to students because so many times people are trying to do what they're doing based on interpretation. I read a study. How many people come up to me? I read this study about black women and breastfeeding. I read this study about women of color and breastfeeding. I read this study. Oh. That is when your work is based on an interpretation. What we're about to talk about is how do you frame your work based on an understanding, which is very different, right? Very different. And when I see people in the community who have come into the community with an interpretation, not an understanding, that work looks very different. An understanding requires conversation. An understanding requires listening. An interpretation you can get sitting in your office reading. So how do we create that experience of an understanding of the community, not just an interpretation, as if that's enough? Before we can have any conversation, we have to have a very important note about this: equity versus equality. These are two very different things, and it's critically important to me that you don't confuse the two, because people get these mixed up, and it's disastrous. I'm going to give you an example that my girlfriend Simran always uses because it's always really great to illustrate the point. How many of you have been to a sporting event, a theater, any place of a crowd, right? You go to a sporting event, ladies, and what happens? The men go to the men's room, and they're back in 5 minutes, right? They haven't missed intermission. They've got a snack. They haven't missed anything. Now, when the ladies go to the ladies' room, what happens? Thank you. There's going to be a line. We're going to miss all the intermission. We got to start asking people, what did we miss? We didn't even get a snack. It's ridiculous, right? Now, I assure you that in that theater or stadium, there is an equal number of men's rooms and ladies' rooms. There is equality. But the experience is not equitable. So in that example, what is required? You would actually need more ladies' rooms for that experience to be equitable. You get the difference? So sometimes you have to do more to achieve equity. So many times people will say, oh, well, we put one there, a supermarket, a breastfeeding support group, we put it there, because they confuse equality with equity. Those are two different things. So what we're talking about is equity. We're talking about how do we create an equitable food system, and that requires doing more, particularly for those who have been left out, underserved, or oppressed in the process. Okay. So I often say women don't breastfeed, cultures do, right? And when there's a culture of support for breastfeeding, it just happens, right? I live in New York City, and if you go to downtown Brooklyn, my girlfriend was cracking up laughing because there's a very strong culture for breastfeeding in downtown Brooklyn. And she was breastfeeding, and then she was pumping, and she had a bottle with breast milk in it, and she was literally afraid to go to the cafe with the bottle, even though it had breast milk in it, because the culture for breastfeeding is so strong. She's like, I can't do it. I can't do it. I'm going to get stares and glares. I can't do it, right? So when there is a culture for breastfeeding, that's an extreme example. We don't want that either, but there are places where there is a culture, right? We see that happening. There are places where there's a culture for food access and eating well, right? There are cultures, and these cultures can grow in a community, in a small community. And you can go 5 miles another direction, completely different story. So we want to start to build a culture. How do we build a culture for greater first food access? Well, the first thing we have to do is separate the act from the experience, right? How do we separate the act of breastfeeding from the experience of breastfeeding? This is so important because many times, even those in my work, they focus on the act of breastfeeding. The act of breastfeeding, literally putting your breast into a child's mouth, not that hard. You may need some technical assistance. There will be issues, but that can be managed. But the experience of breastfeeding in a country where you don't have any paid maternity leave on a federal level, in a country where women are shamed for using their breasts for their biological purpose, in a country where there is a large money machine designed to make women fail, that is hard. That is very hard. But if we're just talking about the act and telling people it's easy, we're missing the whole picture. So we have to focus on the experience, even the experience of eating food, right? If you think the experience of eating food is about putting something in your body, then you don't understand what eating food's about. There's something else that's happening for people in that experience of it, where they are remembering something from their grandmother, something that makes them feel good, something that comforts them. There's an experience of eating that we have to acknowledge when we think about food. We can't just kind of ignore that. So we're going to think about separating the act from the experience, right? And how do we focus on understanding, not interpreting, that experience? So I had this idea, and I was fortunate enough to have the Kellogg Foundation support me in some small projects, and we literally went around to try to better understand the experience. So you can't separate the experience if you don't know what the experience is. So we literally started in 3 cities, Birmingham, Alabama, Jackson, Mississippi, and New Orleans. And if you know anything about those places, they are not sexy cities. New Orleans was good. New Orleans was decent. But they also have a very high infant mortality rate. And so, we were thrown in the deep end around how do we better understand the experience in these communities, right? So we literally went out and talked to people. This is in New Orleans, to really better understand their experience, asking them questions, trying to understand what are their real barriers on a day-to-day level. How can we better understand the experience of living here? How do people feel about their safety? How do people feel about, their futures? Because all of these things impact decision-making, right? This guy was great. It was his birthday, so I guess they pin money on you when it's your birthday. So he was having a good day. So, but what we found were many commonalities in these three cities to really talk about what we found in this thriving place where communities were strong, but there were serious lacks as it pertains to women having the support they needed for breastfeeding, right? So we actually began to see these things be the same. No easily accessible support groups. When we were in Birmingham, Alabama, I literally drove 30 miles to get to a breastfeeding support group, right? Not okay. And I had a car, right? What we want for support for mothers, what we want for our food, hyperlocal, easily accessible. That makes sense, right? Okay, doctors don't refer to a lactation consultant. There's no reason why you should call a pediatrician. He doesn't have a lactation consultant on referral. No culturally relevant IBCLCs. This is a highly trained lactation consultant. It's an area that needs more diversity. And so not having women of color in this field was really perpetuating the stereotype that women who look like me don't do this. Right? And they certainly weren't there to answer questions that may be cultural, that people may feel uncomfortable sharing with a white nurse. So these things are really important. And then this uncomfortable with being nursing in public. Very, very common, this idea that breasts are not meant to be used for feeding infants, right? These are all cultural and social things that have nothing to do with education per se, but really more about how people feel. What is their experience around breastfeeding? And then there are other things that we look for. I took these pictures in Detroit. And so what we found as we figured out the experience, that in the community, the experience was that if you bought formula, there were all types of incentives for you. How wonderful that you can get diapers and wipes if you buy infant formula. This one was free diapers. There was some for free pizza. We saw one that you can win a TV. Very dangerous, right? So the experience in your community is that formula feeding pays. It might give you a night off with the pizza. Who doesn't need that? Who doesn't need diapers and wipes? So this is very dangerous, very dangerous. I did write a story about this, and they ended up changing their policy because WIC should know better. You should not be incentivizing vendors to buy infant formula. It's not okay, right? Very, very dangerous. And then this also happened in Detroit. This is a piece I wrote a few years ago for the New York Times because a company that sells human milk to hospitals had this wonderful idea as part of the Clinton Global Initiative that they were going to come to Detroit and target black women to sell their breast milk. I like the face that she's making right there, like, what? So here we have, first of all, anytime there's a sociocentric initiative, my spidey senses are tingling, right? Like, if you're trying to help women, why was it black women in Detroit and, picking on people in a vulnerable place? And then this idea that you could actually pull yourself out of poverty by selling your breast milk is really telling someone a false story and really hinders the work that we were doing to get women to breastfeed their own children. But what was most disgusting is that they didn't even come to the community to ask what they thought of the idea. Now, I call the Clinton Global Initiative because I was surprised that they don't have a better vetting process for their initiatives, which they allow, because this was part of Clinton Global. And they basically said they didn't, and if you pay the money to be in, the $35,000, I guess you're deemed smart enough to come up with ideas, which is also unfortunate, right? That people aren't being thoughtful. So after this story ran, the mothers in Detroit organized. They organized themselves. It was a great experience. We had late night calls on media strategy. And they put out a letter that was signed by organizations all over the world saying, no, you're not going to come into our community and with an extractive idea that takes away our milk. And the thing that was so crazy, they weren't even saying they were going to take the milk and give it back to Detroit babies. They've got one of the highest infant mortality rates in the country. But they were just going to take the milk out and sell it to whatever hospital would give them the highest price. Now, put out the letter. They got lots of responses. Funny thing was, I never thought I'd be on the site, but teaparty.org picked up this story, right? Because it was a Clinton Global, it was like a big headline, Clinton Global accused of, extracting black women for their milk. It was pretty funny. So after that and some media pressure, they decided to disband this idea. But after these mothers put out a letter, in their letter, all they asked for was a meeting to better understand what this organization wanted to do. I thought that was a low-level ask, because I got a bit more fight in me, but that was fine. Guess what the company said? I saw the email, and this is what the email that they sent back said. In response to your letter, please see our website's FAQ section. So disrespectful. So disrespectful, right? You see how people think they can come into communities and do what they want to do and don't even have to ask. Very disrespectful. So this is what's happening, right? All over the country. They tried to start this up in Pittsburgh, but we got to them before then, right? But the question is, how do we now change this landscape? How do we actually make these environments more what we call first food friendly? So we started this next level project, which was really all about how do we now take what we know about many of these neighborhoods and transform it. Our pilot projects were in Detroit and Philadelphia in 2 different neighborhoods. I was so honored to have Dr. Johnson, if anybody knows her here, from the Department of Multicultural Health as one of my academic advisors working on that, as well as Christian from UPenn, who really helped us think about how do we better understand the community. So, and using this kind of CPPR model. I often say our most revolutionary act was that we were willing to ask questions. We were willing to say that we didn't know, which was really hard, because you think you know. And you really want to try something, but you have to just not do it, right? But how do we ask questions in a way that allows us to better understand the community experience? This is us in Philadelphia. I want to show you this picture because when we surveyed in Detroit, we had many MPH students from this school come up. And I don't know if anybody recognizes anybody, but this was our surveying team in Detroit. Many U of M students. And as you can see, our shirts simply say, "We love Osborne babies," right? No mention of breastfeeding. The good news is, if you're wearing a shirt that says, "We love Osborne babies," people will talk to you. It was great. It was great. So we actually went out in the community and we went asking people questions. And the questions we asked were not about did you breastfeed or did you not breastfeed. We asked questions about people's safety, right? How did you feel about your ability to earn? How do you feel about your, what are your stresses in your life? Because all of these things impact whether a woman will breastfeed or not, right? Relationship status, all of these things matter. We've been asking the wrong questions. It is not about a head knowledge. Do you know that breastfed infants are more healthier? Okay, I got that, but how? We got to focus on the how. So we ask questions. In grocery stores, just really talking to people. And what was so amazing, and also a little sad about this process, is that people were coming up to us saying, oh, what are you guys going to do? What are you guys going to do? And we would say, we don't know. We're really expecting you all to tell us. And they were really astounded, right? Because they were so used to people coming in with their ideas and their solutions, but not being a partner in the process. How unfortunate that more people hadn't been asked what they thought the solutions would be. That's our failure. So we went to them and we asked questions, right? This is the 3rd District of Detroit. We literally go door to door. I call it the Jehovah's Witness approach to breastfeeding. We will knock on your door, okay? But we had such amazing conversations sitting with people on their porches and in their homes. and really trying to better understand their experience. So I'm going to tell you what we learned. Two of my favorite slides. We asked mothers what would make life less stressful for you, right? Nobody here said more breastfeeding information, more nutrition pamphlets. It's not on there. Jobs. Now, this slide is so powerful because in my work, I know that if you're stressed out, you will literally not be able to breastfeed for very long. Stress limits your letdown reflux and will literally hinder your ability to breastfeed. Literally. It's a medical fact. Now, in the broader food world, I don't know how many studies you've read that when people are more stressed out, they eat healthier. But I haven't seen many of those. So understanding people's stress level is critically important in looking at this food system issue from a continuum perspective from birth, right? We're going to come back to this. Remember what you saw on this slide. My next favorite slide. We asked men to describe themselves as a father, and I love this slide because so many times there's so many stereotypes about who black men are. And we haven't bothered to ask them how they see themselves. We'll go in with our idea about who black men are and what they need, but we didn't ask them. Very dangerous. Look at what they said. They said they were good and caring and great and protective. Now, I have no judgment about what that looks like in your life. But as a communicator, how much more powerful is it for me to create something that's based on how you self-identify, versus how I see you, right? So when we got there and the people said, well, we got this dad support group and nobody comes, and then we looked at this and we said, let's just call it the great dad group. And then people started coming, right? There was an assumption that they needed support, but look at how they saw themselves. See, just a little bit of tweaking of our understanding, our communication can be so powerful, so powerful. This is my second favorite slide. We asked about optimism, right? This is so important because when you see that level of optimism, you know what you can do with that? Do you know what that represents in terms of resiliency and coping mechanisms and people who want better for their lives and how you can tie in the message of breastfeeding and the message of better nutrition into that? That's powerful information. So important that we ask different questions if we really want to make a change in how we work on this food system. Who needs to be who needs to be present at the table? We really thought outside the box. We had a great support of local politicians in both cities, artists, early childhood educators, health teachers, workforce development partners, right? This is really important. In Philadelphia, they have a large movement around murals. So we definitely work with the artist community to see if we can get a breastfeeding woman just in the back of a mural. We didn't ask for a whole mural. It's like, just put her in the back on a bench or something, you know, low key, low key. So that happens, you know, in Philadelphia. So really thinking out the box about how do we shift culture. Not that we need to feed people information, but we need to shift the culture in a local environment. So we had our local councilman, who is actually here tonight, Scott Benson, who was extremely supportive of our work in the 3rd District, which Osborne is in his district, and we're very grateful for the support that he gave us. So I want to acknowledge the councilman in the room. Please make sure you say hello. Thank you. So we recruited women from the neighborhood, and we actually brought them into the process, and we said, we have a problem, right? We have a challenge. We explained to them what it was, but we empowered them to create the intervention that they thought would work best in their community. Remember, they are the experts. They are the experts. They've lived there for many, many years. They were the experts, and we allowed ourselves to not be in that role. Very, very important. So we had a curriculum that was developed by Kidada Green. You see there next to me. We recruited moms. We had a workforce development partner who actually worked with these women so that while they were in our program, they were also getting job training assistance, right? They were put into a pipeline for resumes and career services and things like that, right? So this was so important. I'm going to show you what we did in Philly. So one of the things that they did in Detroit, and this is also in the councilman's district, is they decided that one of the things they were going to do is get these Breastfeed His Welcome Here signs, get on stores, right, in different places. They signed up over 50-something businesses. They even got a funeral home. I don't know how that happened. I wasn't there that day, but they were really empowered to change their community. Now remember, we didn't go to them and say, hey, we got this breastfeeding program for you. We went to them and said, we have a job training program that happens to be about breastfeeding and making it more supportive in your community. It's a powerful switch, right? Because we understood what they were really in need of, and we addressed that need. The councilman was also kind enough to, because he already had a Healthy Breast initiative going on in his community, he gifted us one of the billboards for his public service announcement. And so this was all over Detroit. What a great way that we can shift cultural change, right? By saying that communities are standing up for breastfeeding. Really, really powerful. So as you can see, our goal was to really address social stressors, right? We can't continue to make policy that's not connected to people. That just is not the whole purpose of public health. Like, can't forget the public. That feels like it should be built in, okay? And so this idea that we actually created a health intervention that was really a job skills training program, was really an internship. But we invited women in as an opportunity to improve their lives, improve their community, and improve the community for the rest of the mothers behind them, right? That was a win-win-win. Because we weren't focused on, we have to get them more information. We focused on listening to what they needed first and then figuring out how we could fit into that model. How do we fit into that model? And what I was so proud of around this project is not just what the mothers did in the community, but what happened to their lives.
Hi, my name is Florinda Harris. I'm 50 years old. I have 5 children. I have a 34-year-old, 25-year-old, 27-year-old, a 15-year-old, and We just lost my 19-year-old Joshua Harris to a car accident it'll be a year and a half in June. And 3FCI for me, well, it was a platform for me, got me out of the house, kind of gave me a voice, I would say, talking to other women about breastfeeding. I had a little knowledge, but I didn't have the knowledge of the temperature for the milk, the lactation process as well. So 3FCI for me, it gave me a lot more knowledge than what I had in knowing how to properly breastfeed and properly store milk. So for me, that was good. I did always want to breastfeed my kids. I tried, it didn't work. But now it's time, and as I entered into this program, the internship, that made me more aware of how to do it and how healthy it was for myself and my children. So for me, it was a great program. It was a really exciting program. I met a lot of exciting people, ladies, made a lot of friends. And as I said before, it gave me a voice, a platform. And before I participated in the 3FC program, as I said before, I had lost my son, so I was kind of in a really bad and dark place. Deep depressed in state, I would say. I didn't want to do anything, didn't want to just do nothing. So this program was introduced to me, and I thought to myself, like, well, should you? I don't know. But I did decide, I got out, so it helped me out. 3FC changed me by, like I said in the first half, by giving me a platform, giving me a voice, also just making me kind of feel good about myself. It brought me out of my depression stage. It got me out, so I was able to keep busy and to do something. So that really changed me. It helped me out a lot. It changed my outlook on things, people. So it kind of got me out. It took me out of a dark place that I was in at that time in my life. This 3FCI training helped me to understand the breastfeeding process, get out, and to be able to speak with women and young women also about, breastfeeding, which was a task for me. But overall, I was able to understand it a lot more, and it gave me a lot of information that I could give to other mothers and other young moms. It changed me. It made me feel good about myself, and it made me feel good that I would be able to help young mothers in my community as well. It also gave me some job skills to be able to talk to employers and business owners about things. It also gave me some human communication skills that I was lacking in. Working in my community allowed me to be able to get out more, speak with people in my community that I had not talked to. It gave me a chance to know people in the community, to find out what their needs would be, and if they could also help me as well. It also gave me a chance to interact with people in the community as well. So I felt real good about that as well. I felt big when I went in to talk to some of the business owners. I just felt like I was doing something good for my community, to be able to talk to business owners, some representatives as well for our community. It's just the opportunity just to talk to people that I wouldn't normally talk to probably on a daily basis. The internship, it gave me a voice. It also was therapy for me, which was a good thing, because without this program, I don't know what I would have done or where I would be at this point. So for me, it worked out really good. And the program, I think, not just for myself, but for other women, it gave me a much, much clearer and better understanding of how breastfeeding works, how healthy it is for women and babies, and can involve not just us women, but also men. You can also give them an understanding of how healthy it is, to maybe that where they will also encourage us women and maybe their wives or just anybody in their community to try it for the first time, And you know, they may like that. I think it's much healthier. It's cheaper. We do know that. So it was a good thing. And like I said, for me, it did a wonderful thing for myself. I can't speak for everybody, but I can only speak for myself. It allowed me to live again. I would say that, because I was really in a bad place. So I believe that it should be wider. It should go further, because it's really good programming. I'm about to cry. So that's what it did for me. So I want to thank you guys for allowing me to be a part of this program.
So what I love most about Florinda is when she said, I felt big, right? We think about what happens in many low-income communities where people are just living a life of feeling small all the time, right? That's who they're told that they are, the voiceless, don't matter. But you create an opportunity for her to feel big. And it happened to be about breastfeeding. So when I go to Detroit, these women are always talking about breastfeeding. I'm like, hey, let's talk about something else. How are your kids? But they always want to talk about breastfeeding. So now we have breastfeeding ambassadors in the community who will keep talking about breastfeeding long after the program is over, not because we gave them a whole bunch of breastfeeding information and pamphlets, but we gave them an experience of feeling empowered in their community, and it changed their lives. So now they're talking about breastfeeding all the time. The tactics that we can use can be so much more powerful if we think about how we're communicating and really understand what our community really needs from us, what they really need from us. We also opened Detroit's first lactation lounge. We call it the Mother's Empowerment Hub, because it is a place where we do everything, where we will do childbirth classes, but we're also going to talk about job skills training and helping women really have more powerful lives, because we know that we can't keep asking stressed out people to breastfeed and eat well. Oh, and the councilman's there too. Thank you, Councilman Benson. So how do we versus? A few key things as my last 5 minutes. One, what not to do. The story of Narcissus. Everybody knows this story, right? This guy, he loved himself so much, couldn't stop looking at himself. He thought he was the handsomest guy, right? Whatever version of the story you read, he withered up and died, frozen died, whatever. I often say, you know, I dated enough of these guys. You don't want that in your life. Nobody wants that in their life, right? Either way, this guy's no good. But what about us? So many times in our work, we love our messages and the things that we're saying and doing so much. We're just right here, and we're just looking at what we want to do and looking at our message and telling people to be healthy, because that's so important. And we're just looking right here, and we haven't bothered to look up. Because what people really want to see is themselves reflected in our message. That's what they really want to see. They don't want to hear us going on and on and on. Right? Because when we stay right here, that's where our message withers up and dies. Because we haven't looked up to actually see the community that we claim we want to serve. So we don't want to do that. We want to tune in to WIIFM, which is what's in it for me. You may be clear about what you think is in it for them, but you need to turn your radio station dial to make sure you're clued into what's in it for me from their perspective. Right? If you're not tuned into this radio station, nobody's going to be listening. Challenge your own assumptions. What do you really know about the people you seek to serve? Quick story. There's a very well-respected IBCLC, does a lot of work around the country, designs WIC curriculums, et cetera, says to me, Kimberly, you know, I often hear black women say they don't want to breastfeed because they don't want to spoil their baby. Why do they say that? Why are black women afraid to be close to their baby? And I said to her, I appreciate the question. I take all questions. And I was explaining to her that when a black woman thinks about what her child needs to be in this world, in the world that she knows exists for that child, she thinks of two things. That child needs to be independent and strong. And so in her job as a mother to prepare that child for the world that she knows exists, in her mind, she may be thinking, even from infancy, that child needs to be independent and strong. And so often, if she says that she does not want that child to be overly dependent on her for food, that is not because she is afraid to love, that is her love. Do you see the difference? Do you see the difference? What do we really know about the communities that we serve, and how can we challenge our assumptions about even what love looks like, what caring looks like, what good mothering looks like? Take the time to think about what you really know. And then we got to be like Nike. You know what I love about Nike? Nike will make you think that you can climb that mountain, right? Like, I watch the commercials. I'm like, yeah, I can do that marathon. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. But you feel like you can. Why? Because all of us have a piece inside of us that wants to get past the challenge, that wants to see that bigger part of themselves, right? How do we tap into that part of people? Not the part of people that get scared because we're hitting them with depressing figures and how quickly they're going to die and how many people who look like them are going to die. How do we make them feel empowered? Right? How do we make them feel big? Like Florenza said, right? So how can we be more like Nike, that we just get people to be tapped into a message that it's not going to be easy. We know that. Nike is not interested in you if you're easy. They're not. But they are interested in you if you want to get to that feeling. So in our work, we don't tell women breastfeeding is easy. We tell them it's a challenge. But that's why you will feel so good after you accomplish your goal, whether that is 2 weeks or 2 months, because it is hard. We remind them of other challenges that they've surmounted in their lives, whether that was graduating high school, getting their own apartment, getting a job, and how good they felt after they reached that challenge, right? We focus on empowering them and tapping into that, not trying to depress them with numbers about how much their babies are going to die. And then we acknowledge who is the best messenger for your message. It may not be you. And are you okay with that? You may have to check your egos and your power trips in order to really be successful in the work. There's a lot of talk about allyship. I cross out that word because I'm not a fan, necessarily. Because allies still has a connotation of me helping you. We're going to apply a new word to that. Let me tell you about it while you look at why I do what I do, right? These are my 2 babies who I was proud to breastfeed for many, many years. And so when we're in this work, we can't forget about why we have to make a change, right? Because this is about my children's future and their children's future. And that this isn't about trying to save a community. This is about an understanding that we are actually co-liberators, right? Our futures and our destinies are inextricably linked. My future is connected to your future. And any baby that does not have first food justice means that no babies have first food justice. That's the model of co-liberation versus allyship. That we see our destinies as dependent on each other, and you're not free until I'm free, and I'm not free until you're free, which is very different than me thinking I have to come and save you. How do we create a co-liberation model around making things different for the next generation? And so your final question, because this is the most important thing that I need you to take away from this session today. And I think we're going to get 100%. We need to get 100%. As we think about what is the optimal place to find solution on improving food, the optimal place to find solutions to improve food access is, where do we want to always look for our solution? Where's the best place? In scientific journals, the gold standard of scientific inquiry, RCT trials, or in the community. Let's see how we're doing. All right. We got somebody holding out for the science. We will work on you after this lecture. But this is a beautiful demonstration of what we really want to be thinking that. Like, we can find answers in the community. It's a place that we can go, that we can empower, we can help it grow, and we can actually build interventions from there. I want to close with this quote from Grace Lee Boggs, another Detroiter, because this really epitomizes the work that we've been doing in Detroit and Philadelphia. It's about many systems, many things happening locally, occurring simultaneously, right? And if we get that movement going in one community, and then we feed it to another community, and then another community, and then we have all of these local things happen simultaneously. And the next thing you know, we have first food justice for all. Thank you so much. Yes, and I will take some questions.
Let's see, do we have anybody? Okay.
Anyone have any questions or comments?
Raise your hand if you have a
Please raise your hand for questions.
Can you talk about,
Well, close to you.
can you talk about the effect of WIC and the formula that WIC gives? And the fact that they may give enough formula to feed a baby pretty exclusively on the formula in the beginning, but as that baby grows, that family's going to have to buy formula.
Yeah. So all over the country, WIC, varies by state, making some important strides to support breastfeeding. But WIC is the largest purchaser of infant formula in this country. The whole system only works because the infant formula company gives them rebates. So the government system is built on relying on infant formula rebates for it to function. So, yeah, it's not really going to be that vested in breastfeeding, beyond what we can see. Also, there's a misperception that WIC will give you enough formula for the month, and that often does not happen. Women run out, and then they end up stretching it, which obviously compromises its nutritional quality and leads to a whole host of other issues. Even more disgusting, in Detroit, I just got a call that, they sell the infant formula in like little powder packets, singles, and it's in a box that says not for resale. But the retailers at probably those same type of vendors have opened up that box and are selling that individual sleeve of infant formula powder for $2.50 for one bottle, right? All of this when you were taken away from your own ability to breastfeed, when your own ability was stunted. Right? Because just like stress will impede your lactation, milk supply works on supply and demand. The minute you start giving formula, your supply will decrease because the baby's not on the breast. So even one bottle a day starts to reduce milk supply. So it becomes a literal self-fulfilling prophecy when women start supplementing with formula. So the WIC issue is a big one, and I try to be nice. How am I doing? Thank you so much. But it's something that we have to work on. We'd like to see more WICs, states doing more to support breastfeeding. It's important. Any other questions? Hi.
You touched on this a little bit.
Put it a little closer to your mouth.
Okay. You touched on this a little bit, talking about the base of the formula. I was just wondering if you could maybe just go a little bit deeper into the effects of the dairy industry on people's knowledge, specifically about their infants, and kind of, did you find that in your conversations with women and community members that there was this idea that somehow cow's milk was an equivalent or a supplement that was just as fine as women's breast milk? Because I know that it is very common for like older children to drink a lot of milk, but I was wondering if you found that, specifically with infants.
Yeah, I think that few people have the historical knowledge to understand how we got to drink cow's milk, particularly as infants, when, we can't drink it directly until we're 12 months. And so really that this whole, if you go back historically, and I went through it in the book, it really was about the commodities that were prevalent and what the government was subsidizing. Dairy farmers have been subsidized in this country and by the government, and so there's a vested interest in them having outlets for their products. And so many women do believe that there's a good reason, a nutritional reason, why cow's milk is the base when there actually is not. There really isn't. And the fact that they simply keep adding ingredients and acting like that makes it better, it really is a problem. And when we look at what's happening with children, particularly infants around their gut issues, going forward, it's a great story in the New York Times today about microbiomes and what's happening to our intestinal health when we're not breastfed because of what the cow's milk and those does to our bodies at such an early age, it's very dangerous. It's very dangerous. The other thing that we need to say, like, I know infant formula needs to be there for the babies who need it. My baby was in the NICU and they gave her infant formula, so it's very important that we have it. But we have to improve the nutritional quality of infant formula. It is not FDA regulated, and we don't know how much sugar is in it, right? Our formulas contain the very dangerous sucrose, which is has a known link to obesity. The European countries have banned this sugar from the infant formulas, right? In New York City, the wealthy women don't even buy US formula. They buy European formula because ours has that dangerous sugar. And no one is saying anything, right? And so what is happening when a baby is being fed a diet of a dangerous sugar from day 2 of birth? And they're having that how many times a day? Some independent test found some of these infant formulas had as much sugar in one serving as a Red Bull. Wow. It's crazy. And then when I travel, people are like, well, I saw that black mother giving her baby a Pepsi. Why? Well, if you've been drinking a Red Bull, the equivalent of a Red Bull since birth, by the time you're 2 years old, a Pepsi is the only thing that will satisfy you. But the government does not even make them disclose how much sugar is in the infant formula. So there's a lot of pieces that we have to do around education. Why cow's milk? What do we know about the sugars? The same way that we are talking in the broader food movement about what's in our food, and we don't want GMOs, and we need to know what's on the label. We need to know what's in infant formula, even more so for the most vulnerable infants, right? We have a right to know. And so we can all kind of add that to our food conversation, that our right to know what's in our food really begins with the food for our infants as well. And that we have to get more accountability on the corporate side and from the government side. Any other questions? Yes.
I thought it was. Am I on?
Yeah.
Okay. I thought it was so interesting how mothers' recognition of what their babies need to be strong and independent changes the way they love their kids now, because it shows it's not just a historical aspect, but there's present day and future context that change the way they act. Are there other ways that they see the world that change the way that they care for their babies?
That's such a great question. And I appreciate you seeing that connection between what we saw, that disrupted motherhood experience, right? Even going back to slavery, to this feeling still today that you can't protect your child, you can't save your child. I have a 13-year-old boy, and the fear is real, right? The fear is real. And so what can you do? I mean, the couple of things that we do counter that narrative, and we explain to them that actually the way that you have strong independent children is give them a really strong base at the very beginning, and then they go out, right? So we do counter that and try to talk to moms about that, but we also honor the other ways that they love, right? And the ways that they do show care. And that could be reading, caring for them. There's many, many other ways that we honor and that we don't exclude from that conversation, and then we try to bring them back to breastfeeding. I think that Black mothers have been denigrated in our society. I often say that we are perceived as desirable for taking care of everybody else's children, but somehow viewed as incapable of taking care of our own, right? That's the lie the media tells. And so we use that to encourage them to create a new narrative. We talked over dinner about social media really being a place where Black women are crafting their own stories about breastfeeding. They are saying we're doing this, they're showing themselves, they're showing images, and to say that, this is how we show our love. We look at it as part of social justice, right? There's a reason why your neighborhood is full of junk food. And there's a reason why even the government wants you to give your baby junk food. That's what we tell them, it's the truth. We empower them to combat that narrative. We know they want your baby to be sick. But you don't want that. I don't want that. Let's work on creating a different outcome, right? And so we actually use that as the way that we empower them to do something different. But the education that we give them, again, is not about benefits and risks, right? It's about the context of their lives. It's about their role in really a social justice movement as well. Thank you for that question. Yes.
Hi. So with, as you mentioned, there being some context where it's necessary to use infant formula, like in the neonatal ICU. Are there any initiatives or any third parties that are trying to get some sort of recognized healthy and standardization of infant formula for situations where it's necessary to provide a baby with formula?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked me that question. That's an awesome question. When a mother's milk is not available, the second alternative should be human donor milk, not formula, right? We've created a narrative that it is either breast milk, a mother's own milk, or formula, when there's really a lot in between, including human donor milk, right? If a baby's in the NICU and their little underdeveloped gut needs breast milk, there are millions of ounces of donor milk available for that baby, right? Not even for cost through that company, but through human milk banks. And so we have to raise awareness as well that if you cannot breastfeed your child, it does not mean that you have to automatically go to infant formula, human donor milk, particularly in NICU situations. So that's the initiative that we're working on to create more awareness around human milk as the first substitute for mother's own milk. And then if we can't get that, then we can move to some variation of infant formula. But particularly in those NICU settings, that formula is very dangerous for their stomachs. So we really don't want that at all. But human donor milk, people, remember that, okay? Was there another question in the back?
I really appreciated how you talked about the answers with the community. One of the I work in an office on campus, and one of the things we talk about is people are experts on themselves.
Yes.
And I was wondering how much variation there is between communities with the program, if there is any, or if there's like connections based on like specific situations within the community.
You mean in terms of the communities, what we found out about the communities?
If there's like differences, like if there's variation, or if there is like kind of a consistency across.
Yeah, no, there were definitely variations. I mean, the communities aren't the same. There were certain variations we found, particularly like in Philadelphia and Detroit. They both have a kind of urban food movement, good food movement, and so we were able to tap into that. So people were aware of this idea that big food is not serving us, right? So that was an important thread for us to capture. In other cities, when we were in the Southeast, that didn't really exist, right? And so the fact that we had a certain level of awareness about food in general, and that people were starting to think, hey, maybe everything we eat shouldn't have been made in a factory, that was really helpful for us in our messaging. So you do find, what we try to do is try to find local movements, threads, trends that we could tap into. Like I mentioned, the murals in Philadelphia, that was unique to Philadelphia. And then try to find those kind of threads. In the Southeast, we worked a lot more with churches because that's a big thing in the Bible Belt. So we did a lot more work with faith-based organizations, really trying to use women's ministries, the health ministry as our way. So in each community, we had to find the thing. But like I said, it takes a little bit more work, right? But that's the whole point of trying to work for equity. Thank you.
Our time has come to an end, and I'd like us to give another warm thanks
Oh,
for
thank you.
your activism, your ideas, and your accomplishments.
Thank you.